Okay, so now let's talk about D3 finally. So the first thing you need to use D3 is to set up a version that you can use. You can do two ways. You can download the code and host yourself, or you can use the CDN. That is basically you don't have to download anything. You just point to this JavaScript file and your page works. The advantage of the first one is that if you are in an offline environment and you want to showcase your tool, if you are using CDN, will not work. So this version is good either if you have a production and you want to optimize your hosting, or if you are using if you need to showcase very often offline. And this one, if you are always online, it's a simple thing, you can use the CDN version. So for the assignments, I will always ask you to use the CDN version. So you just have to submit your code. You don't have to submit the D3 files. One thing important is that because of the way web browsers work, you cannot access local files. This means that if you want to load a JSON file or a CSV file on your machine, you will need to run a server to be able to do that. You cannot just open an index.html file. And a simple way to do that is if you have Python, you can just run Python -m simple HTTP server if you are using Python version 2, or Python 3 is like -m http.server 8000 if you are using the version 3. So this will create a server for you. So just go to your folder, to the folder of your project, and run this code, and that will work for you. And you see that I'm using brackets, and brackets kind of do that for me. So that's the reason you are not seeing me running the server. So in my case, I am using brackets as my server, but I still needing a server. So one thing just to understand D3 a little bit before we start to playing with it is that D3 work in two stages basically. So the first one, you can bind the data to elements. So you load some data, you can have data in your page, doesn't matter. And then you use this data and you bind this data to elements. And this means that now D3 will keep track of these elements and the data. So each row in your data, for example, will become one element, and D3 can know which elements belong to which row of your data. And then you can just work on the changes of your data. Whenever you enter with new rows, or you exit is when you remove some rows, and then you can update your view based on that. And to select the view and update the view, D3 uses selectors. So we have the select that is used to select the elements that will receive the data. Then we have data that will be used to bind the data to the elements that you select. Then you can handle the changes. We have enter and we have exit. Again, enter for new items, and exit to remove it items. So when things are leaving the data, you have to remove them from the screen. And of course, you want to load external data. So D3 works in a way that you only need D3 to do almost everything. So you don't need jQuery or anything to load a file. You can just use d3.json if you are loading a JSON file, or you are accessing a REST API, or you can use a CSV, d3.csv if you are loading a CSV file. Okay, so let's see how we can do that and how can we use D3 to manipulate data and load data on our page. Okay, so I'm gonna start with a clean page. So we have nothing here. The only thing that we have is a div with the ID vis. That is where my visualization would be. So D3, you need to specify some root node where you're gonna work with. So in my case, that will be my root node. So if I have a title or something like here, it will not affect the rest of the page. So and here will be my code. So the first thing to be able to use D3 is to load D3 in the page. So we can do that by going to d3js.org, and then we have two options. As I said, you can download D3, or you can just use their hosting of D3, the CDN version. So you can just copy this tag here into your code. So that is everything that I need to load D3 in the page. So if I want to check if D3 is in my page, I can just use console.log D3 and refresh here. So you see that here I can see that there is some information of D3. So this is actually the D3 object, and I have the version, behavior, and so on. So this means that D3 is loaded in the page. If I remove this, for example, you will see that I get an error. Oh, sorry. If I remove this, you will see that I get an error saying that D3 is not defined. So D3 is not in the page. So this line here is loading D3 in my page. Okay, so now I want to work with D3. So the first thing that I have to do is to select this div that is the one that I want to work with. So I can do that by, let's call it this, d3.select this. And here I use the same concept of CSS. So I use hashtag for IDs, I use dot for classes, and I use nothing if I want to select everything with this tag. Like if I want to select the div, for example, I could do in this way. But in our case, we want to select this specific div that has the ID this. Okay, let's see if that works. And I will remove this line. Okay, so I have an array. Inside the array, I have an element div. So you see that marked here. And this means that I select the element div. And then now I can manipulate it. So I can do, for example, this.text d3js. So you see that now I changed the text of d3js. This, in comparison with our last week, would be exactly the same of doing this. So document get element by ID this, and then do this2 dot inner HTML equal d3js. So it's exactly the same thing, but you can see just here, you can see that you have to type less with D3, and this also, D3 will help us facilitate another things, not just that. So, but in comparison, you can think in D3 doing exactly the same thing we did last week, but now D3 comes as a facilitator, so we don't need to do that anymore. We can use always D3. Okay, so let's remove this just to make easy. And now I want to create some data for my page. So I will create an array here with numbers, handle numbers, and then I want to show this on the screen. So for each of these numbers, I want to add an item on my screen. So how can I do that? I can do this dot select all div. So this means that I am selecting all divs inside this div, and now I want to bind some data to these divs that in this case are numbers. So you may think I am selecting divs that do not exist because there is no div inside this one, but don't worry. because what D3 is doing is binding the numbers to divs, and if they don't exist, D3 will have a placeholder that you can manipulate. Okay, and that is where the enter function comes. So whenever I call this function, D3 will check if there is any div for each number here in this container. If there is no div, then D3 will call this function with the element, with the number, right? So you can do, if you want, you can create an element, and that is what we want to do. So we can do append div. So this will create a new div for each new number, and the text will be n for now, just to make it simple. So you see that now I have many n's, 1 n for each number. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 numbers. So again, what happened is I give the data to the tree, and I said, okay, in this div here, I want you to select all divs that exist. If they are binding to some number here, you don't have to do nothing. But if they are not, then you have, if there is number here that doesn't have a div, then you have to call the enter function and append some divs. Okay, so how do I show the number instead of the n? So remember that I say that we can pass functions as parameters in JavaScript, and in this case the tree accepts a function, and it will always call this function with the first parameter being the number that is working right now. So I can do exactly that. So I am creating a function that returns the same parameter that is passed on. That is, will be the number in my array. So let's see. So now I have the numbers in my list. Let's just review. So we have here, we are selecting pseudo divs inside this one. Then I am assigning the numbers. Then for each new number, that in this case are all numbers because all of them are new, I am creating a div and setting the text inside the div to be the number on my array. Okay, so I can keep changing things here. I can change, for example, the style, and in the tree I can change the style in two ways. I can just say pass two parameters like color red, then every number now is red, or I can do using JavaScript objects in this way. So I can have, for example, background color and a little gray, and then I can do border solid 1px black, and here is a color. So you have these two ways to set the style of your page, right? You see that I have to do okay, now they agree. Okay, because I have a minus sign here, I cannot use this without the quotation marks because this is an operator in JavaScript. So I have to use quotes here. And then I can change the background. Okay, so this is how I change a style of the page. You can also, of the elements, you can also change attributes using attr. And then you can change any attributes of your element using this, like for example, the class of the element. And let's suppose that I want to call it item. So then I can have here a style, and I have a class called item, and then I can create, for example, shadows. Okay, maybe you cannot see the shadows, but they are here. Or you can change the width. This one will be easy. Okay, so I can change. I can select the way that I want to change my page. Okay, so now I want to see what happens, how this data can be updated. So one thing that I want to do is to add a button here on top of this div. Add number. So every time I click here, I want to add a number to my data set. One thing that you notice that is different from the previous one is that we are not interested in update the elements in the HTML. We are interested in update this array and hope that the elements will update. So what we can do, we just create the button. I will call it on click add number, and let's create a function here. Because I have the tree, I can use the tree to select the element now. So you see that the tree facilitates also not just creating the visualization, but manipulating the DOM. And the way you can get the value of the element is by using properties. So because some properties of the element are not handled by the tree, so you can use this method to get the value from there. Another way to do the same thing is using node. So you can do exactly the same thing. Then node dot value. When you use node, you are getting exactly the HTML element. Then anything we did last week to change the element, to manipulate the element, we can do after using dot node. So you are getting the HTML element. So both way works, okay? And then I can call it new number equal. And then if I have a new number, I can now push these numbers to my array. So numbers push new number. So I just add the number to the array, and I want to update the screen to show the results. So I would have to run exactly the same code again. So instead of doing that, I will create a function here to render the data. Right, so I don't have to keep copying and paste code. So here I will call render, so I can render the first time. And now every time I add a new number, I want to render again. Let's see. So I have the initial set of numbers. Now I add 12. And I have 12 here. Okay. So again, I'm clicking the button. I'm calling add number. And then I'm adding the number to my array. And then I just call render. I don't have to keep recreating and everything and manipulating everything in the page. Okay, now what if I want to remove an element? So I can add listeners to the object that I'm adding in the tree. So if I use on click, I can run a function based on the click on the element. So again, the tree will call a function and will pass as parameter the element and the index of the element in the array. Right? So D is the element and I is the index of the element. So if I want to remove some number, I can just do numbers, splice the index to start, and how many I want to remove. So I will remove, this is a method that changes the array, and then I will remove the I element of the array. Then I just have to call render again. So remember, every time I call render, I'm just updating the screen and making the screen reflect the data. Let's see if that works. Okay, it doesn't work because the tree don't know that I'm removing, what to do when I remove something from the data. It knows what to do when something is added to the data, but don't know what to do when something is removed from the data. So how can I solve this problem? I can use exit. So an easy way to do that is to create a variable that handles the changes. And then I can do changes.enter for anything that is new. Changes.exit for anything that I'm removing from my array. And then I can just do remove. This will remove the element. Let's check now. Okay, almost there. The problem is that now I am removing, but it's the last element that is being removed, not the element that I'm clicking on. That happens for one thing. So to take track of what changes in the data, if you don't specify anything, the tree will use the index of the array. So what happens is that once I remove this element, the tree will only notice that the last element changes, because if I remove 5, the indexes of all those elements changed, and the last one is the one that is removed. So for the tree, it's not this element that is being removed, it's the last one. So one way to change that is to provide to the tree a way to have a key. So to do that, in the data function, I can pass a function that returns the key, that in this case will be exactly the same number. So in this case, the tree will understand that instead of looking for the index, it should look for the number 5, because that is the one that is removed. So let's see if that works. Now it removes the number that I'm clicking the first time, but not in the second time. So you see that now I click in 6 and it removes like 2, I remove. Now if I remove 5, I remove the H1, and then now, so it's not correctly, it's not removing the right number to be removed. So that happens for another thing. So whenever I do this process here, in the enter function, the tree is saving these numbers. So I need to recall this every time the data changes. So the easy way to do that is in the update function. So I can remove this one from here and add it here. So now, every time the data is rendered, the tree will update the function itself and will update the indexes. Because what's happening is, as I remove, the tree is not updating the index for the other elements. So if I call in enter, remember this only runs for new elements. And in exit, this only runs for elements that are being removed. But I have to update for all elements. So that is why we can do that directly on changes. So this will update all the index. Let's see if it now works. 2, 6, 1. Now works. It removes exactly the number that I'm clicking in. Cool. So just to review, so we have a render function, and this function is responsible to take the data and render that in the screen as we expect this to be. And we have select all in one element, so we have this that is our container, and we use select all to tell the tree which kind of elements we are going to be adding to this one. So in this case, we are going to create div elements, and then which data we are going to use, and we are using those numbers. And then I can use a function to tell the tree which is the key of these elements, the unique identifier. So this means that I cannot add two elements with the same number, right? So if I want to have repeated numbers, I should have another thing to be the key. Then I tell the tree that for each new element, so whenever I have enter, for each new element, it should create a div, change the color of the text to red, change the background to gray, change the border to a black border, and then assign a class to this item. And this class is class item that is adding a shadow to the element. And then at the end, I'm changing the text to be exactly the number that I have in my array. Okay, so this works for new elements. Then I have exit that works for elements that are being removed. And I just tell the tree that if an element has been removed from the data, it should be removed from the screen. And then the last one is for all elements that is still on the screen after all this process. I want that whenever I click in this element, I want this element to be removed from my array. And I want the page to re-render and update with this new data updated. Good. So this is basically how the tree will works. Anything that we keep doing from now is building on top of those elements. So if you don't understand how enter exit works, and you can ask in the forum, and play a little bit with that and try to understand, because those are the fundamentals of the tree. Everything that we're going to build will be on top of this enter and exit and update functions on the tree. So now I want to go to load an external data. So just to instead of having an array, I want to have an external data. So this is not that hard to do. So one thing that I can do is load files. I have here, for example, two types of data. We have JSON files or CSV files. CSV files are the ones that are delimited by comma, and I have the titles on the top, and then I have the values here. JSON files are in a way that each row is the full object. So the title comes together with the row, and I can have different values actually. So this one can have a second attribute here like color, and the other ones doesn't have to. So this doesn't happen with CSS. Also, JSON can have more complex information like countries where we can have apples, and we can put here USA or Spain and so on. So those are things that are harder to do with CSV. Okay, but let's keep it simple. This is my original JSON. So I have this JSON file and I want to load, and instead of showing numbers, I want to show the food names, okay, and the deletions. Let's go back to here too. To load a file, I can do d3 dot, because it's a JSON file, I can use JSON. And then the name of my file is data.json, so I can use data.json. This is everything I need to load a file. But one thing that you have to have in mind is JSON files are outside of the page, and whenever I am loading something outside of the page, the browser do that asynchronous. So this means that if I write something here, this can happen before the file be loaded. So I cannot manipulate the file here. I cannot work naturally as I'm using to. What I have to do is to pass what we call callbacks. So this is a function that will be only called once the data is loaded. So the callback will receive the error and the result of the data. So if I have any error loading the data, will be here, and this is the actual data. You can use, instead of JSON, you can use CSV to load CSV files, or text to load text file, or even HTML if you are loading a HTML file, and so on. So we are loading a JSON file. So I can only start to rendering the data inside this part. Okay, so now what I can do, I can call render from here instead of calling it from here, and I can update my numbers to be equal my result. Okay, so the thing now that is, I have to update render to change just a small thing. So the first thing is, I cannot use the object as key. I want to use the food, the name of the food as key. So I can do d.food, because now this d is the object, each of that rows of food, and then I want the food name to be the key. And I want to do the same thing here. I don't want to show the number because I don't have numbers anymore. I want to show the name of the food. Okay, just with those changes, let's see if it works. Okay, so now we have the names of the fruits here. Is a little bit too small, so let's increase the size here to 250, so I can have the fruits. And I want also to show the deletions in parentheses, so I can do just a little bit. And a d dot. Let's see how it is. Now I have the deletions of the fruit in parentheses. So you see that I didn't have to change a lot just to change the data set. So I just had to specify which of the fields should I show and use as key. And I can click and remove, but I cannot add anymore because I will add a number and cause conflict. Okay, so now I want you to use everything that I talked about D3 until now and load the Gapminder dataset on your previous assignment. So one thing that we don't need anymore is the add button. So we don't want to allow the user to add countries anymore. So we want to remove that line, the label, the text box, and the add button. And so you see that we don't have it here on the image. Then I want you to download the Gapminder dataset, and the link is in this page, so just below the video, and load the data from the file into your page and just show a list of the countries. Okay, so and then you have to submit your index.html file as your assignment, and just remember to submit everything in just one file. So your CSS, your HTML, and JavaScript should be in just one file. Great. So thank you, and remember to use the forum if you have any questions or comment, and submit the result of the exercise on this week assignment, and see you next week.